Shalom Aleichem, Mishpachah.
Alaikum shalom.
Glad to see you all out there in television land tonight. Hope you're all doing well and nobody's having any major problems. We're praying for all of you, and let's all pray for each other. Oops. Now you can hear me.
That's right.
Always a little something going wrong. Our time was wrong on the start time was wrong tonight, but we're up now. So, but pray for each other, and don't forget to pray for our prayer needs at the bottom of the email list. So look down there and pray daily for those if you would. Trusting that everybody had a great day of prayer and fasting yesterday. So
Yes.
I'm glad we can get together tonight. I'm going to lay my phone down for a moment. I've entitled our study tonight, the Megillah of Matthew, the scroll of Matthew. And as you will very soon see, it's a very Jewish book. In its earliest form, it most likely would have been written on a scroll made from an animal skin. So we will learn a little bit more about that. But our purpose tonight is twofold. First, it is to show who Yeshua is, and second, to show the Jewishness of the book of Matthew. Before we begin to study the book, I think it would be interesting to learn something about the man Matthew. First, his name. Matthew is the English transliteration of the Greek transliteration of his Hebrew name. His name in Greek is Matthaios, as you can see there. And the complete Jewish Bible renders his Hebrew name as Matityahu. The name Levi ben Kalphai, or Levi, the son of Alphaeus, is the name that Mark gave for him in his gospel. As he was passing by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. He said to him, "Follow me," and he got up and followed him. So as we've just seen in the book of Matthew, we find that the author identifies himself as Matthew, and this is possibly a second name. He was sitting in a tax collection booth and working as a tax collector right outside of Capernaum on the shore of the Sea of Galilee when Yeshua first met him. As Yeshua was passing by from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. He said to him, "Follow me," and he got up and followed him. So what we generally know is that his station on the road passing by Capernaum, Matthew collected taxes from local merchants, also from farmers, and particularly from caravans that were shipping goods along this main highway. Now, Matthew was looked upon by the other Jews as somewhat of a scoundrel. Because he was an employee of the Romans, he was looked upon as a thief. And many of the Roman tax collectors were thieves, and they took taxes for their own personal gain. And Matthew himself may have been a thief before his heart got changed. But as we see Matthew sitting at his tax collecting station in Capernaum, his being there may give us some insight as to why Yeshua chose this particular small town for his headquarters. In that day, Capernaum was not as unimportant as you might think. It was a pretty busy town. Matthew's tax collection booth was there because the highway that passed through Capernaum was a major route linking Egypt with Syria and Mesopotamia. It was known as the Via Maris, Latin for the way of the sea, and that is the I-95 of that day. Then the Via Maris, along with the Via Rex, the King's Highway, that was the I-85 of that day, further inland. It went south from Damascus along the eastern shore of the Jordan River. And so these were the two highways upon which goods could be transported between those major areas in Yeshua's day. If you look at that map, you will see the red lines. The red line closest to the Mediterranean Sea is the Via Maris, but you will see that there's a little loop that turns off of it and swings right by Capernaum. And so that's where all of the action is taking place that we're talking about right now. Further to the right of the Jordan River, is the Via Rex. So these were, as we said, these were major trade routes, and the amount of money which Matthew took in would have been sizable. So if he was a thief before he met Yeshua, he probably was a pretty wealthy thief. Capernaum, in Hebrew, Capernaum, the village of Nahum, was and still is situated on the northwest shore of the Kinneret, the Lake of Galilee. In Yeshua's day, it was a fishing village, and it possibly was also a garrison of Roman troops. This information, the highway and the troops being there, could suggest one possible reason for Yeshua's choosing this small town as his new hometown. It had a very strategic location, and many, many people passed through it. The events of Matthew's gospel took place approximately between the years 26 and 30 CE. But it was written much later. And there's considerable disagreement about how much later it was written. Some authorities would say that it was after the year 80 CE. I don't think that's likely. And many Hebraic scholars dispute that because the narrative in Matthew ends about 40 days before the temple was destroyed in the year 70. So that's not depicted. Hebraic scholarship would put the writing sometime between 58 and 68 CE. We also see that none of the Gospels, Acts, or any of the letters tell about the destruction of the temple. So this would suggest to me that everything in the Ketuvim Shlikim, with the exception of the book of Revelation, was written before 70 CE. However, Revelation is the one book that most agree was written sometime much later, possibly between 90 and 100 CE, when John was an old man. But why Matthew took so long to write his gospel is unknown. I have my own theory on that. My theory is that it didn't take that long, that it was written much earlier. The problem is that Matthew apparently went through several evolutions of writing, beginning first in its Hebrew form before finally arriving in its Greek form, which may have been between 58 and 68. Papias, the bishop of Hierapolis, who wrote sometime between 125 and 150 CE, quite a bit later, was very likely the earliest one to say that Matthew collected the oracles in the Hebrew language. And then you see that Irenaeus and Origen both said a similar thing about 25 to 35 years later, sometime between 175 and 185. And then much later, Jerome made that statement in 382 CE. Matthew was originally written in Hebrew. I think it's very possible that the latter three on that list copied Papias' statement, and where he got it from, I don't know. But all four of them essentially said that Matthew was originally written in Hebrew. Others say, no, not Hebrew, Aramaic. Well, I believe he did mean Hebrew. Hebrew was, and it always has been, the religious language of the Jewish people. We do know that Aramaic was a commonly spoken language after the Jews returned from Babylon, but Hebrew continued to be the spiritual language. What Pilate wrote on the sign at Yeshua's crucifixion is additional evidence for that. Pilate also wrote a sign and put it on the execution stake. It was written, Yeshua HaNatzrati, the King of the Jews. Many Judeans read this sign because the place where Yeshua was executed was near the city. It was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. If you look in the Greek text, it says Hebraisti. I'm going to believe that that means Hebrew and not Aramaic. And those who say that it was Aramaic have done so with an assumption that Aramaic was the only language used by the Jews during that time period. Well, there's a lot more evidence about this, about how Matthew was possibly written in Hebrew. If you want to look into it, you can consider the Jerusalem School of Synoptic Research, which is located, of course, in Jerusalem. And you see their website there. Once when we were in Israel, we met at a synagogue service. David Bivin, one of the directors, who is also one of the authors of the book, Understanding the Difficult Words of Jesus. But we have a lot more to consider tonight than how the Gospel of Matthew was written. I think it is essential that every Bible student know that all of Scripture, Genesis to Revelation, has a Hebraic background. For a correct understanding of the things which Yeshua taught and the things which his disciples taught, we must tap into Hebraic understanding. So we see that all of Scripture was written by Jews using Jewish methods of writing and teaching. Even Luke, if not a Jew, was at least a God-fearer like Cornelius, a man who followed Torah, and Luke possibly also could have been a convert to Judaism. So he was writing in a Jewish way. Regarding the Jewishness of the Gospels, we also have to consider the possibility that Yeshua is presented in them as the prophet like Moses, the second Moses. In John chapter 1, those who came to John to be immersed by him asked if he was the prophet. John replied, "No." And this is in reference to Deuteronomy 18, in which Moses states, "Adonai your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brothers. To him you must listen." And then later on in John 6, Yeshua performed a miracle and fed the 5,000. Afterwards, John reported, when the people saw the sign that Yeshua performed, they began to say, "This is most certainly the prophet who is to come into the world." So we see that the people at least thought that Yeshua was the prophet of Deuteronomy 18. And you and I know that he was. We can call him the second Moses because he fulfilled the requirements given by Adonai to Moses. Adonai said to me, "They have done well in what they have spoken. I will raise up a prophet like you for them from among their brothers. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will speak to them all that I command him. Now whoever does not listen to my words that this prophet speaks in my name, I myself will call him to account." So Adonai has very clearly said there that everybody must listen to Yeshua or they will be held in account by him. And we know that Yeshua is also said to be, like Moses, a prophet, a priest, and a king. Why is he a prophet? He's a prophet because he prophesied when he was on the earth. He is a king, as in one of his parables, who is currently in a distant land. He's in heaven, and he's waiting to return to earth and claim his kingdom. And he is a priest, a Kohen. At his death, he assumed his office as a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And the book of Hebrews shows us that he ascended to heaven to perform his priestly duties in the tabernacle there. When we get to Matthew 5 and the Sermon on the Mount later on, we will examine this event as a parallel with Moses on Mount Sinai. So what we see is that Yeshua fully lived the Torah, and he taught others to do so. In Matthew 5, he said, "Do not think that I came to abolish the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to abolish the Torah or the prophets, but to fulfill. Amen, I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or serif shall ever pass away from the Torah until all things come to pass. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, this one shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." So we know he's talking about the Torah and the prophets because that's written in Hebrew. There is no smallest letter or serif in the Greek text or in English. So that's what he was talking about. So to best understand the Gospels and all of the letters and all of the writings in the Ketuvim Shlichim, we must read them through Jewish eyes. And in the selection of Jewish Bibles, of Bibles available to us, the Tree of Life version and the Complete Jewish Bible, I would say, are the best equipped to help us understand the Hebraic background. So now we're going to get to the book of Matthew. The first 17 verses of Matthew chapter 1 deal with the genealogy of Yeshua, and that will be our focus tonight. The book of the genealogy of Yeshua HaMashiach ben David ben Avraham. Yeshua the Messiah, son of David, son of Abraham. Matthew begins by entitling what he is about to tell us. He said it is the book of the genealogy of Yeshua the Messiah. Or in other words, the record of the lineage of Yeshua, his family tree. And he identifies him as son of David. And this is a very explicit term which identifies him as Messiah and also from the royal house of David. And then, by calling him son of Abraham, Yeshua is identified as a son of the father of the Jewish people. He is Jewish. So let's look for a moment at the king relationship. Isaiah prophesied in his chapter 10 about the captivity of Israel. But he said that a remnant would return. He also indicated that the reigns of the descendants of David, the kings of Judah of that era, are ending. And then in chapter 11, Isaiah began with this. Then a shoot will come forth out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch will bear fruit out of his roots. By saying this, Isaiah was prophesying by implication that the family tree of David, the rulers of Judah, would be chopped down. There would be no more Davidic kings. And then here in chapter 11, he prophesies that from the stump of Jesse, David's father, will come a living shoot, and it will become a branch which will bear fruit. And this, of course, is Yeshua, who will bear fruit, not only as Messiah, but also as the prophesied king. Isaiah was saying that one day the dynasty founded by King David would fall. And he compared this line of kings to a tree which was cut down and leaving just a stump. But he also said that one day the stump would sprout and grow again. And it would be a miraculous thing. Why would it be miraculous? Because this stump had long been dead and dried up. So this sprout from the trunk of Yishai, Jesse, David's father, would be the Mashiach, the anointed one. Kings are anointed one. That's what Mashiach means, anointed. The prophet Samuel anointed David with oil to symbolize the anointing of Adonai's spirit upon him to rule, even as Adonai actually anointed David with his spirit. We know David was filled with God's spirit. And David and all of his king descendants after him were Mashakim, that is, anointed ones. And so by understanding anointed one, we can say that Yeshua HaMashiach also implies Yeshua the King. Verses 2 through 15 describe Yeshua's genealogy. And as I'm sure most of you know, this is one of two genealogies found for him in the Gospels. The differences in the two leads to considerable confusion and misunderstanding among believers. In addition to this genealogy in the book of Matthew, there's a second one in the book of Luke. Our question is, why would Adonai give two different genealogies? Well, there have been a lot of explanations for this, but I think the simplest explanation may be that the genealogy in Matthew shows Yeshua's descent through his legally adopted father, Yosef, and then the genealogy in Luke is his descent through his mother, Miriam. So after all of the ancestors in verses 2 through 15 are read, we're not going to read them to you tonight. I encourage you to read them yourselves. As he concludes the genealogy, Matthew says, "And Jacob fathered Joseph, the husband of Miriam, from whom was born Yeshua, who is called the Messiah." So since we haven't gotten to Luke in the order that you read them yet, we now only know from Matthew that this was the genealogy of Joseph, who was the husband of Miriam, Yeshua's mother. But we are going to look a little more closely at the genealogy that Matthew laid out here, verses 2 through 15, and to do that, we have to do some research in the Tanakh. If you will go and look in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings and also 2nd Chronicles, you can discover that there are other ancestors of Joseph whom Matthew did not include in this genealogy. And the most common question which comes to mind is, why is Matthew not being accurate in his presentation? And you probably have had experience with this too. Atheists and naysayers regularly pounce on this, in that saying that Matthew pounce on this as being a flaw in the scriptures. But the truth is, Matthew is not trying to be accurate in that way. By managing the number of ancestors in the genealogy, Matthew is sending us a hidden message. Written as it is, we understand that this is not a completely correct genealogy, but it is an allegory making a specific point. The other ancestors are still there between the lines. We don't see them, but they're understood to be there. And it wasn't that Matthew didn't know about the other ones in Joseph's ancestry, but he intentionally chose to write it this way. He intentionally left out some generations so that those which remained would form a pattern which would make his point. He actually wrote the genealogy in 3 sets of generations, and that is the foundation for his underlying message. Verse 17 says, "So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David until the Babylonian exile are 14 generations, and from the Babylonian exile until the Messiah are 14 generations." So what we're looking at here are numbers which add up to the total which Matthew has predetermined that he wants. A total of 42 generations. So what we see here is that 4 generations were left out: Ahaziah, Athaliah, Jehoash, and Amaziah. So there are actually 46 generations from Abraham to Joseph. But that is not Matthew's point. In reducing the 46 generation to 3 sets of 14, a total of 42, Matthew is using gematria. Now, I know you all know what that is, but I'll just give you a very brief description of it. It's a well-known Hebrew system which uses numbers to hint at an underlying message. So we could say that it is a system of letters and numbers which assigns a numerical value to a name, to a word, or to a phrase based upon its letters. Or in the case of Yeshua's Matthew genealogy, it is based on its numbers and then converted to letters. And that's what I want to show you now. This is how we can understand it. The Hebrew letter Dalet has a D sound, and it has the numerical value of 4. The letter Vav has a V sound, and it has the numerical value of 6. The word David in Hebrew, Dalet, Vav, Dalet, has the numerical value of 14. 4 plus 6 plus 4. And so since we have 3 groups of 14 generations leading to Yeshua, Matthew is using gematria to very loudly state, David, David, David. And what does that mean? It's all about Yeshua, the son of David and the Messiah of Israel. What is Matthew's intended message to the reader? Son of David, son of David, son of David, Messiah of Israel. If you will look at that, that will show you exactly what we've just looked at. Dalet, Vav, Dalet, 4, 6, 4, total 14. 3 sets of 14 generations. So, we understand that's what it is because we have been given the opportunity to understand. But if you read it in English, very unlikely that you're going to understand it. And what we find is that Matthew's use of gematria is but one example of the many Hebraisms which we see not only in the book of Matthew, but all through the Ketuvim Shlikim. As we've just read, Matthew plainly states in written words that Yeshua is the Messiah. But he also encodes it for emphasis. And I believe that he did this so that Jews and other Hebraically oriented individuals would recognize it and realize its Jewish origin. It was a Jewish way of emphasizing Yeshua's genealogy and messiahship. The testimony of many modern Messianic Jews, and I've heard a couple, includes the fact that after reading the book of Matthew, they immediately recognized that it was a Jewish book and not a Gentile one as they had been told. So I believe that we have established both of those points tonight. The book of Matthew is decidedly a Jewish book. It is a Megillah, in my mind, a scroll. And it also has established that Yeshua is Messiah and King, number 1. Shalom Aleichem.
right now. Repeat it.
Repeat what you said.
All right, I hope we're continuing live, because what I said was, you can make a comment on the text if you want, but if you want to call my cell phone and say something which would go through my phone and out through the live stream, you're welcome to do that. So if anyone calls, I will watch to see if you're calling. So I hope that this has been a good study for you tonight, and if nobody calls in the next minute or so, I'll sign off. Is any, Danny, are you looking at the text?
Yeah. Give it a minute. You're still talking on this. Still talking.
All right, y'all got to catch up with me.
Somebody did something. Wayne Chasen said something. Mara Alexander said something. Can you get all of this?
I see. Gary just texted me and said he enjoyed the study. Glad you did, Gary.
Margaret Wagner.
You want to read Marguerite's thing?
Okay, well, I'm getting some texts, but no
Wayne
calls.
Chasen is on. Wayne.
Wayne is on what?
It's 7:32. He said, "Hey everyone."
Well, I don't know where that came from.
It's from the video chat.
It's on the video text, and Patty Wetzel said, "FYI, I turned my phone off."
I saw all those. I thought you meant by voice.
Right now you have 8 people still watching, so you could just ask the question again if anyone wants to call. There's still 8 people watching right now.
Well,
Wayne's
this
on.
is obviously a learning session, and maybe this is not going to work quite as well as we hoped, but
Wayne says, "Hopefully I will join earlier." And her book says, "Going to get to ask questions." And Mara Alexander, "Hi Rabbi, thank you for sharing the Megillah of
I
Matthew."
see, I'm reading that.
Oh, okay. And Patty?
I see all that. So thank you all for your comments, and don't forget to tune in on Shabbat at 11 a.m. Not 11 a.m., 12:30 for our live stream. But don't be late. You may miss something. Shalom Aleichem again, and we'll sign off.
We off? But they were commenting on this, and they don't know how to put it on live chat, so I'll have to work on that. But that's good, Robert. Don't you think?
I hope it was good.
Well, I thought it was wonderful Marguerite got on,
I saw Marguerite on there.
but I thought it was wonderful that Wayne was watching.
Yeah, well, Lou told me that he had watched with her on the other one, that he's watching.
Liz told you that?
Lou.
Who?
Lou, his